At this time, we'll call the meeting to order. We'll stand with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Councilmember Brescher.
Here.
Councilmember Coyle. Councilmember Deal. Here. Councilmember Gomez.
Here.
Councilmember Joshi.
Here.
Councilmember Patil.
Here.
Councilmember Freeman.
Present.
Adequate notice of this meeting, as required by the Open Public Meeting Act of 1975, has been provided by a special notice sent to the Home News Tribune on June 2nd and posted in the main lobby of the Municipal Complex on the same date. Due to COVID-19, we have announced at all prior council meetings.
Thank you. At this present time, we will have our Honorable Mayor, Thomas Lankey, to present to us the 2020 calendar year municipal budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, council people. It's great to be here. It's great to actually see all of you in person. It's been a while, I think. And thank you for being flexible and hosting this meeting at the college so that we could allow as many people as possible to be here. It was the largest capacity we could think of, and I think it was important to have as many people here as possible. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, much like other years, a short presentation. It's about 20 pages long. Should take me, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes or so. I would ask that you hold all questions until I'm done, and then obviously, yes.
Excuse me, they have to do a sound check because your voice is not coming up loud enough.
Really?
So can you do a sound check again?
1, 2, check.
Hold on a second.
I don't have to repeat all that, do I?
That's good.
Is that better? Check 1, 2.
That's perfect.
Okay. Did everybody in the back hear me? Yes. Okay, perfect. So if you could hold all questions until I'm done.
Oh, I was going to tell you. Oh.
And then we'll open it up to questions, I think, from the council first, and then,
Yes.
and then I think we'll go to the public that are here. You know, we'll be here as long as you have questions, hopefully not too long, but we'll answer all questions that you have. Any questions that I may not have the answer to, we will get you the answer and get it back to you as soon as possible. Did you?
We ready now? We good? All right.
We're good.
Yes.
Okay, so just real short in the beginning, I think when we came into office in 2014, one of the challenges we talked about was the infrastructure, and it was pretty much a crumbling infrastructure. At that point in time, we developed a plan to address year to year portions of that infrastructure, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. It was going to take a while. The budget you see in front of you is a continuation of some of those infrastructure improvements that we talked about. Understanding that times are difficult and tough, the budget that we're going to present is what we feel is the best option at this point in time, and it weighs continuing those infrastructure changes because we have seen when you stop improving what catastrophes can happen, and you start from further back than where you had left off. And then obviously looking at the tax that the residents are paying and with the attempt to try to keep that as low as possible. But I'll go into some of those details as we get to them. I'm handling the slides also, and I'm limited in what I do on a technical basis. Sam Joshi would probably attest to that. So I'm going to turn your attention to slide 3. So slide 3 goes through and shows the effective tax rate. As you know, every town in the county has a different equalization ratio. And the equalization ratio is based upon your values and your sales that have occurred in the previous year and what the ratio of that is. They try to then equate your assessed value to what your real value is and try to get what everybody's actual value is and try to put everybody on the same page. This is for 2019 because obviously it hasn't been compiled yet for 2020. This comes from the county abstract of ratables. And what we've done is we've kind of listed the effective tax rate, which would be the rate that you would pay based upon the real value of your home or your business. And it shows all the various taxes that you would pay: county, the open space for the county, school, municipal, and library, and equalizes those. And you can see the next to last column on the right is that equalization ratio, and then gives you your effective tax rate. As you know, Edison is the 7th best, or they have the 7th lowest effective tax rate in the county, and you can see the various towns and what their effective tax rates are. Page 4 illustrates it a little better, I think, and shows that in the average house or average property, which is currently in 2019 assessed at $179,900, which would be a value of $437,000 because of that equalization ratio. That current tax in Edison Township is $9,692. As we said, it's the 7th lowest in the county of all the towns. You can see what each town would be. So that would be if you lived in a house which was valued at the average house in Edison Township of $437,000, what your taxes would be. You go from a low in Cranberry of $7,583 to a high of Highland Park of $14,961. You know, we always like to compare ourselves to Woodbridge Township, similar size, similar makeup, similar diversity, similar industry. You can see their current tax in 2019 was $12,576. So they're about $3,000 higher in taxes for the same value house than you would pay in Edison. Page 5 just goes through the different breakdown of what percentage and what dollar amount, and this is for 2020 with this proposed budget in place. You can see the highest portion of your tax bill comes from the school, which is 56%, so you'd pay about $5,700. Municipality is 24%, it's about $2,475. The county, which is 18%, it's about $1,850, and the library, which is 1.5%, is $156. Currently, in 2020, the average assessed value in Edison has gone up from that $179 to $180,400. And the market value of that has actually escalated quite a bit to $476,000. Our equalization factor has dropped to 37.88. So that 41% we were talking about in the previous slide has dropped down to 37.88. And that was based upon the sales that we experienced during 2019. I want to point out the municipal portion of the budget, if this budget goes through, the increase in that average house, that $476,000 valued house, would be $175 a year, or about $44 a quarter, or $44 a payment. So just to put you know, a relativeness to it, it's $44 a quarter, or $175 for the entire year for the municipal portion, which again, to remind everybody, the municipal portion is what we can control. We don't have control of the county taxes, we don't have control of the school taxes, and the library we've set at the minimum required by the state. So that's the portion of the tax bill that we have control over. It's about 24% of your tax bill. Even though you pay the entire amount to the municipality, we then have to pass along the portions that are applicable to the school, the county, and the library to them. Page 6 is just a history showing where our net taxable values have gone from 7,028 in 2014 to 7.261 in 2020. You can see that equalization ratio Again, that's what's used to get that value into what your true value for your properties are. So using those ratios in various years, we've gone from 14.1 million in 2014, billion, sorry, to 19.2 billion in 2020, an increase of about $5 billion in those really 5-6 years. So we have increased substantially during that period of time. Page 6 is a busy page, but one I think that's very important and I think illustrates something important. It shows each town. It shows their equalized value. You see Edison, which is the fifth down at the 19.2 billion in equalized value. Obviously, we're much higher than any other town in the county. Woodbridge is second, and it's 11 billion, so we're substantially higher. But I think what I want to point out is the change from 2019 to 2020. If you look at that last column, and you see Edison has increased value or valuation 9.5%, and clearly higher than everybody, 3 times the average, and again, just comparing to Woodbridge, who was at 2.6%, substantially higher than them. So the positive news is that we have increased the valuation of your house or of your property. The negative news is the county strikes their tax increase by town based upon those sales that occurred the prior year. So if your values are increasing, you're going to get hit with a higher percentage of their increase. The county tax across the board this year was a flat tax. Edison, however, you'll see, got hit with a 10% increase from the county. That's a state formula, one that is, regulatory in place, and one that I think is probably not fair, something that we need to discuss with our state representatives, because it is a state policy, and decide a better way to do that. Because we're being penalized, in essence, for doing a great job with improving our rateable base and improving the values of our properties. So that's something that I did want to point out. The 9%, great news. 10% tax increase from the county, not so great news. So I think that's something that we do need to address. I was not clear that that's exactly how they had to do it. I thought they were doing it differently. This year really stuck out when I looked at it and saw that that's really not fair. So hopefully we can work together and try to get that changed. Page 8 just shows the levy cap calculation and shows that really an accounting calculation of how much you can increase your tax levy. And just here to point out that we could have, obviously we did not want to, increase the tax levy another $2 million. So, clearly we did not go to the height of what would be allowable by regulations. We stayed below that and substantially below that. So this is just a recap of that calculation. Page 9 is just a breakout of the various revenues that we have inside the township, just to give you an idea of where the revenues are coming from in this budget. Obviously, energy receipts and property taxes are the highest amount at 30%. Surplus, which is being utilized in this budget, is 14%. Other miscellaneous, 18%, and so on. So it just gives you an idea of where your revenues are coming from. And that surplus, I do want to point out that there was substantial amounts of surplus utilized in this budget to try to keep that tax rate down. Page 10 shows the appropriations or expenses for those in the private sector, and obviously shows that most of our expenses are from public safety. It makes up 37.5%. Debt service is another 10%. Obviously, in the infrastructure changes we have, a lot of them are financed, and you'll see debt service for that, for a lot of the infrastructure and improvements and whatnot. Insurance also is in there, and that would be both your group insurance for your health benefits as well as your insurance for your properties. Page 11 just kind of points out, I think, where some of the difficulties were this year with this budget. On the right side, I'll start with the appropriations. You see appropriations are going up about 2.5%. Mostly, public safety insurance are the two largest amounts. Most of those are contract related or regulatory related. Obviously, our health benefits, we are self-insured, and therefore we do pay dollar for dollar, depending upon where the gaps ride in, where we have insurance on some of the gaps and overages. But we are self-insured, so a lot of that does come back directly to the township. On the left side, I think, is the real story, which is the revenues. And you see revenues have decreased in this budget, some of it based upon regular revenue drops. Other parts of it are clearly related to COVID-19. I'll point out a couple, latchkey, clearly with the schools being closed. You see a big reduction there of over $1 million. The municipal hotel tax, clearly there weren't people staying in hotels for a few months. Those dropped. Our courts, we've seen a drop. We've seen a large drop in our interest. Obviously, we don't have investments, but we've also seen a huge reduction in interest rates, so we aren't returning the interest that we would normally see. So bottom line is, in total, the revenues, you see about a 3% drop. So that, to me, is where the huge challenges are for this year. And most of those drops are due to COVID-19 and some of the difficulties that we experienced with trying to operate the township. And some of those revenues may come back. A large portion of those revenues are lost, and you will not see them come back. And that doesn't even touch upon the tax receipts. We did pretty well on our tax receipts for the last quarter. We're hearing that the real stress could come in the August payment, as far as people being able to pay their tax bills. As we know, if you have a mortgage, a lot of banks and finance companies will keep an escrow, and that's where a lot of the money came for last quarter's taxes. Whether or not that's going to repeat itself, whether or not they've been replenished, whether or not people are going to have the wherewithal to pay their tax payments, whether there's going to be bankruptcies on the commercial side, that we don't know. That's one of the risks that we have in this budget, is what is going to be the true annual impact when we reach the end of the year of COVID-19. Page 12 just touches upon some of the one-time revenues that we've used over the years to, again, our strategy is to try to keep the tax burden of the taxpayers as low as possible. So where we can and not jeopardize the future of the township, we try to bring in some of these revenues. And you see in 2020, we've brought in almost $11 million. 7 of it is a surplus. $2.5 million is from tax appeal settlements. We did affirmative tax appeal, which is where we actually appealed the property and increased the value, and we were able to get revenues based on that. Page 13 just goes through our history of the total assessed value for the town. As you see, back in 2011 and 12, we had reductions. We were at $7.3 million in 2010. We dropped to 7.1 in 11, to 7.0 in 12, and to 6.99 in 13, which was our low. We've been able to come back up pretty steadily each year, arriving at 7.261 for 2020. But you see, we still have not even gotten back to where our assessed value was in 2010. that clearly has an impact on not just the values, but the taxes and the tax rates, because obviously your rates are set off of your assessed value. Page 14 just goes through, we began showing kind of an overview of our tax appeals. Back in 2009, 10, 11, we started facing substantial tax appeals. This shows how many cases there were, what the properties were, the assessment changes, the refunds that were paid, and then the far right column shows how many appeals are still pending. We had 105 appeals filed in 2019, of which 30% have been resolved. We've become much more aggressive in trying to resolve these appeals currently, so that we don't have the burden of all these appeals sitting there year to year and hopefully hitting us all at once, which would have a dire impact on not just the budget, but the tax rate in whole. So we currently have 446 appeals that are still pending. '15 shows the debt repayment from some of the financings that we did on some of the tax appeals. Back in those years, we needed to bond for some of the appeals, and we obviously have to pay those in the coming years. You see it hit a high of $4.5 million in 2016. It's leveled off to the $2 million mark. This year it's $2,007,000, and next year it's $2,049,000. So it has stabilized. But again, we still are paying $2 million in financing costs for previous years' tax appeals that have come in place. Page 16 just points out what I said before as far as our infrastructure. We've tried to invest and have invested over $100 million in our infrastructure, broken down into the various categories of roads, DPW, recreation, police, fire, and buildings. We have tried to make sure that all of our departments are as state-of-the-art as they can possibly be. We've spent money in the police department, obviously upgrading to try to maintain accountability, the body cameras and cameras in the vehicles and replacing vehicles. In fire, we replaced the entire fleet with the new engine that's coming this year in a couple months. We'll have replaced the entire fleet in the fire department over the last 7 years. So, trying to, again, not just deal with the infrastructure of buildings, but deal with the equipment, make sure our employees have the equipment, have the tools to do what they need to do so they can perform their jobs at the highest level that we would expect them. But we also need to make sure that our properties, our buildings, and our infrastructure in whole is where it needs to be. And again, this is something that I think was neglected for a number of years. It's not something you can do in 1 year. You need to do it over the year, over many years, have a plan in place, and you try not to jump off of that plan, because when you do, you end up going backwards, and it usually ends up costing you more to try to catch back up. So this budget does have the continuation of some of those infrastructure projects in it, and hopefully we can get those accomplished. Page 17 just points out the one component of the capital program, which is the road improvement program, which we have been trying to get through the entire town. We do have a plan in place. We try to stick to that plan. A lot of things interfere with that plan, especially some of our utilities. When they decided that they need to dig up portions of the town, certain streets, we obviously have to stray from the plan that's in place, because we don't want to, if we can avoid paving a street and then having it dug up a year later. We will go to that utility and make them repave that street, but for a period of time until all that settling occurs with where they've dug and patched, the street is not where you're looking at, and in much in many cases, far inferior to where it was before. So this just goes through and shows the $40 million that have been spent on the local streets. This does not include the grants that we've gotten for other streets. It doesn't include, the state roads and the county roads that have also been done. This is the township component of that infrastructure program. So again, the municipal part of the budget, which is what we can control for the average property, is $2,475 a year. I've listed here, I don't need to go through them. Everybody knows the services that the township provides, but this is what we provide with that $2,475. Public safety and the infrastructure clearly are two of the main goals and topics that we have in place. On to 19, the financial challenges. I mentioned COVID. Clearly, that's something that was very unique this year and something that we couldn't predict. And we don't know what the future holds for the remainder of this year or even going into next year. Are we going to continually improve, open up, or are things going to get back to normal? Are we going to hit a roadblock? Are we going to have to go backwards? I don't think anybody knows. You can watch what's going on across the country, whether or not we've done things appropriately, whether or not there's a vaccine. There's too many variables in place. So we don't know what the full impact of that's going to be. We know what it's been over these past 3 months. It's been substantial, something that's been difficult for us to deal with, but clearly we have. But we want to make sure that whatever comes to us, that we're prepared for and that we have the wherewithal to deal with. Again, as we showed, the decrease in assessed values that occurred starting 2011, we've yet to get back to that number. That's clearly a challenge. The $2.5 million in affirmative tax appeals was positive. We can't count on that every year. We were able to bring $2.5 million back into the budget in revenue, which was helpful, but we don't know whether or not we're going to have any opportunities to do that in the future. Page 20 talks about what I had mentioned before, that we don't want to dramatically increase taxes year to year. You want to try to stabilize. You don't want to have to deal with some revenue shortfall. You don't want to have to deal with what you saw with COVID. You don't want to stray from what your plan is as far as trying to get your infrastructure in place. So we have used over the years a large amount of our reserves and our one-time revenues. The good news for that is that you can keep that tax rate and that tax increase down for that current year. The bad news is you don't have it for the next year and that next variable that you didn't anticipate. So, one of the strategies you would like to have is you continually build towards a surplus, you have reserves, and you can utilize them in those emergencies. We have used, I think, every bit that we feel comfortable using and bringing this tax rate down to where we have. 85%, as I mentioned before, of the budget is due to union contracts and state regulations. So again, the option of where and how you make cuts is limited. It has a dramatic impact. Your opportunities clearly are when your union contracts come up. They came up a couple of years ago. Most of you, I guess, were here to vote on those contracts. And you then live with those contracts for the remainder of that contract. Health insurance is something that you can't predict. The world has seen some dramatic increases. Our increases, I think this year, are in the 5% range, not as dramatic as you see a lot of other places, not as dramatic as you've seen here before. So that's one of the positives, I think, that we can point out for this year. But we have used a lot of reserves and there's not a lot of opportunity to reduce expenses without having an impact on services, in my opinion. Obviously, this is all my opinion. I'm sure you guys have different opinions, which I'm sure I'll hear about in a little bit. And again, the pandemic, I don't want to keep harping on it, but you know, it's real. We don't know. You know, usually we sit here and we utilize surplus and we feel comfortable that we're going to regenerate a certain amount of surplus during the year. This year is a little grayer. You know, I don't know, as I said, with even the tax payments, are we going to get those tax payments in? You know, are we going to get the jump back in some of the revenues, some of our services? We hope so, but we can't be certain. So one of the risks that we see in this is that we don't regenerate surplus that we would like to see, and that would limit us moving into next year and as far as what the opportunity is to bring some of that in for next year. Page 21, which is the last page, just talks about us moving forward. I spoke about the financial challenges we have. We need to continually update any of our projections, any of our forecasts, any of our reserves, any of our opportunities, whether they be on the revenue side or the appropriation side, and try to take advantage of all those. Community center, as you know, something that we were really pushing forward with, and we've talked about for a couple of years. At this point in time, we kind of put that on pause. Put it on pause, not so much for the financial component of it, but you know, what our community center is going to look like in the future, I don't know. You know, you know, we were talking about potentially having pools, basketball courts, hockey rinks. Clearly, they've closed. Some of the indoor recreation is going to be opening back up. But what are the limitations going to be? You know, what is the post-COVID situation going to be? So I think we need to look at that, evaluate that, and make those decisions, not in a vacuum, but you know, look at it in that world that we're projecting is going to be the world that we're living in post-COVID. So right now, we have put that project on hold. Infrastructure, as I talked about, we have to maintain and keep investing in our infrastructure. We can't go backwards. We need to invest in our public safety. You know, my opinion is a municipality, its main purpose is to keep its residents safe and its businesses safe. You know, if there is no safety, you have no municipality. And those values that we see that have jumped, you know, the value of the average house has gone from $437 to $475. That's because people want to move here. There's a lot of reasons why people should move here. You know, we have a great school system, we have great diversity, we have great services, we're in a great location, but people have to feel that they're safe. Otherwise, why would anybody move here? So I think we need to keep our services at that highest level, kind of like a little bit of marketing. You know, it does. People do take note of that. You know, when Money Magazine named us the 19th best place to live, it talked about a lot of our services. It talked about the things that we provide, and they do not go unnoticed. So those things I believe that we do need to keep in place and heighten wherever we can. Same with technology. You know, we're living in, God, I don't even want to date myself, probably 1990. Maybe that's being generous, but we have a long ways to go when it comes to technology, and we need to start to invest in some of those technology improvements and try to get into the 21st century, you know, maybe even to the 20th century first and then to the 21st century. Increasing our ratable base, as you know, our opinion has been that we wanted to try to look at redevelopment. We want to try to increase our commercial base. We don't want to you know, put any more stress on our school system. So we've been trying to stay away as much as we possibly can with the residential. but to look at our commercial rateable base and try to increase that in a way that, the bulk of the tax burden is shared and eaten up by that commercial base, and it gives a break to our residents. So with that being said, I think in conclusion, the budget that we've presented is what we believe is the best balancing act between providing the services that we need, providing the manpower and public safety. We're down substantially in our numbers. We're about 20 to, I would say 19 in the fire department, 23 in round numbers. That's not so round, but as far as what our manpower and what we believe our staffing level should be, we do need to bring some people back on. We were in the process of doing that, obviously, and then we kind of got sidetracked with COVID. So it's not an excuse, but it did happen, and one of the reasons why we need to ensure that our town is desirable for everybody is make sure that our public safety, all our services, our infrastructure is in place. We do recognize the burden on the taxpayer. We do recognize the times that we live in, and we do recognize that we need to try to keep that as low as we possibly can. But we have to look, I think, long-term as well as short-term, and we've prepared and are presenting a budget that we believe provides that balancing act. Again, the municipal portion of the budget for the average house, which is valued at $475,000 approximately, would be $175 a year or $44 per quarter as far as what your increase would be. We understand that $44 is difficult for some, but we believe that we struck that balance between that tax increase as well as providing the services and not stepping backwards. So with that, I appreciate you being patient and listening to my presentation, and I would now open it up to any questions, Council President, that the council may have.
Council President? Just, Mayor, did we hear from the bond rating agencies yet? Any impact from COVID?
We haven't heard anything yet, no.
Okay, thank you. And have we heard from the state on any potential guidance, any federal aid that might be in discussions?
So we have had conversations with the county as far as reimbursement for some of our expenses. We haven't heard any definitiveness on any aid in the revenue side or any help that we may receive on that. It's been a lot of bills that have been floated. None of those bills have gone through to finality. So as of now, we have nothing that we can count on.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Excuse me, when speaking, please speak more directly to the mic because it's hearing. Some people cannot hear what you're saying. I want everybody to hear what everybody's saying. Thank you. Council member?
Anyone else want to start?
Council member, who wants to start?
Sure.
All right, Council member
Sure.
Joshi.
So first, Mayor, I appreciate the presentation, and I thank you for the presentation that you put forth, and I also respect the work that goes into forming the budget. As you may know, I also serve on the Finance Committee with Council President as well as Councilman Gomez, and I've had the opportunity to look at the budget in a way where I previously had not. Now, some of the questions that I want to know are pertaining to COVID. I'd like to start there. Now, obviously, COVID impacted everyone in our financial situation as well. But we do have Middlesex County, which received a large sum of money. To my knowledge, it was about $140 million through the CARES Act. And from my understanding, they are going to keep the lion's share of that portion, correct? Or,
Yes.
so let's just say from what I have heard, it was supposed to be out of the 140, they keep the $40 million. Or even if it's $50 million, there's still a large portion that would be split to every municipality across Middlesex County. What portion did we, and I've asked this question in Finance Committee as well, what dollar amount have we requested?
As I discussed, we haven't requested anything yet. They just opened the portal up with probably by the end of this week to early next week, we'll have the numbers that we're requesting from March 12th to May 31st. That's the first amount of expenditures they'll let us put in.
Okay, and
So can I just add? So they'll allow you to request what you've spent that was specifically related to COVID, like if you had to have overtime, if you had to bring people in to do something, you had to buy PPE, they'll then reimburse you for that amount that you've spent. They'll also allow you to apply for other things that you're looking to do. Like let's say we want to have infrared temperature scanners at our entrance. They would allow you to apply for that. They may or may not approve that. So we're going to look and have looked clearly at what we've spent. We've looked at some of the things we'd like to do that would obviously make the township safer, but none of that money would in any way compensate you for any revenue that you lost. There's
Okay.
no revenue permitted in that money.
okay, and do you know between March and April how much we spent on these items, or what were they?
Yes.
I don't have them off the top of
No.
my head.
Oh, you mean now?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant do we know? We do. I don't have the. We can get you that. That'll be one
Okay.
of the things we can get for you. We can. You want just March to April, or you want March through?
Well, you said March, April right now, which is why I asked it, but I would want to know projected for the whole year.
March 12th to May 31st
Yes.
is the first installment.
Okay. Now, so this, I understand that this does not account for loss of revenue. However, there is a reimbursement component to it, that it's potential money that we would get back.
For expenses that we expended.
Correct.
Correct.
So that's the first item that I find that we, in terms of being able to offset the budget, let's just say we wanted to reduce our overall expense on this budget, we can tap into that.
If we had expenses that are in this budget that would have related to specific COVID expenses, yes.
Okay, so in my opinion, I believe the obvious answer is yes, there's money that would be left at the table.
I mean, I don't think that this budget takes into account a lot of the COVID expenses. Okay, when I was talking about impacts of COVID, I was talking on the revenue side.
Okay,
This budget doesn't show the PPE
okay,
that we expend, that's not in this budget. We are hopefully, as you're saying, expecting to get reimbursed for those dollars. If we didn't get reimbursed for those dollars, these appropriations are nowhere near enough.
okay,
So I don't think, but I'm saying there might be some. You might be able to go through it and find some expenses that you could say was COVID, but this budget wasn't prepared with the COVID expenses in mind.
okay. So that's the first thing. The second is, I understand that FEMA reimburses 75%, but we wouldn't get that back until next year, correct?
If,
I don't think they made a determination on that. What they're telling us is that FEMA will predominantly reimburse overtime.
Overtime, okay. And what were our overtime expenses?
Like I said, I can get you them as soon as we fill the report out.
Okay,
We're compiling those right now from Human Resources.
okay. Now, the third, I'm going to call these tools COVID tools because they're potential resources that we can tap into to offset an increase this year. The third tool that I find or am aware of is the legislation that is up in the air right now, or has been discussed heavily by the Assembly and the Senate, which directly does account for the loss in revenue. The most recent bill that was posted by Speaker Coughlin does account for that. Now, I recognize that we have not, or the state has not passed a bill yet, and I recognize that it's been about 4 weeks worth of a conversation, but it's in my opinion that we should wait until we find out what resources we also have from the state to offset the revenue. And if you can come up with the number that we've lost from revenue, for example, the hotel or the hotel tax or the latchkey program, those are direct losses that would be covered under every single form of a bill that we've had in the Senate and the Assembly. That's a component that they've agreed upon.
I don't disagree. You're a little more optimistic, I think, in those things passing than we are. We want them to pass, just like some of the legislation in Washington. I mean, Pallone had some legislation. None of that's passed. The problem is that whoever passes it, they need to get money from somewhere. The state is hard pressed to, I think, pass funding that they haven't gotten from Washington. Washington seems to be not passing funding that seems to be reimbursing some of the states in the Northeast.
Makes sense.
If you say. But I agree with you that hopefully those bills pass, and hopefully we do see some compensation and reimbursement for that, and that would be great. We've been waiting. We've been on all the calls. I've been making calls to our representatives, and I'm not as optimistic, I guess, as you are as far as the passage of those bills.
Okay. And the reason why I say this is because from loss of revenue, if you look at it from an annual perspective, that can amount to just $2 million in revenue, and between CARES Act or FEMA, that's another potential $1 to $2 million as well. So we're looking at approximately $4 million out of the $9 million additional that we're trying to raise. So it's about half. So that's where I'm a little hesitant. Now, you mentioned staffing levels, and we've had this conversation in the Finance Committee as well. Now, I agree that we need to meet staffing levels, and I recognize that public safety is a large part of our budget. But what I'm surprised is that between public safety, police department, and fire department, we had approximately, just in 2019 alone, $3 million in overtime expenses. Now, I recognize that some of them, or there's a large portion that gets reimbursed, and for example, in the police department, but there's also another component with the fire department where it's mandatory overtime. But what I could not wrap my head around is, from a management perspective, why were those staffing levels not addressed last year or the year before, where we had, to the point where we now have $1.5 million in just the fire department overtime?
So we have addressed the staffing levels pretty much every year. We've done hirings for the most part every year. What you have a difficult time projecting is obviously who's retiring. I mean, we have a number of people retiring tomorrow in the police department, some of which just let us know a couple days ago that they were retiring. So we do try to address every year. We had to clearly develop the list for hiring. We had to do some of our background checks, our interviews, our physicals and whatnot. We would have had those people in place, I would say, if COVID didn't hit. So again, I'm going to say COVID has prevented those people from being in place now. As far as previous years, I think we've hired, more people than you've seen in recent history. We've increased the numbers in each of those departments beyond what they have been in recent history. I think back, you'd have to go back into the Spadoro days to see the numbers higher than what we've been trying to keep them at. So I agree with you. We take that very serious. We try to hire. Is it a perfect science? No.
So from a management perspective, what's the rationale behind hiring in rounds versus hiring as you go? Hiring as someone leaves? Why not just fill that gap as soon as someone retires?
You're saying hire like one for one person retires, you're going to hire one person?
Yeah, so have a list ready, which there is a list, and why not just replace people as we go?
That's a philosophy, for sure. There are substantial costs in bringing people in an interview. How many people are you going to bring in? How many people are you going to consider? That has a cost upon it. I think the best use of the dollars are with doing it that way. Don't forget, when you hire somebody, it's not just the salary of that person, it's the fringe benefits. Because when you bring somebody on, and that's one of the misnomers, you bring somebody on that's making $50,000 and they're replacing somebody that was making $100,000, you feel you should have large savings. Problem is that that person for $50,000, their benefits cost you almost $50,000. Mm-hmm. So, that doesn't, provide a 2-to-1 situation. So I think that that's one of the things that you need to look at. But as far as bringing one person on when one retires, it's something you could look at.
See, that's where, and I'm going to stress this because the fact that it's not looked at already surprises me. And I say that because if you refer to, for example, the fire union contract, which we approved, the drop-down chain in command, that's what I'll refer to it. So when one person is out, they take the next rank and they have to be filled, so they get paid at a higher rate. It's gotten to the point where a battalion chief, for example, or 8 battalion chiefs have comprised of approximately $500,000 in overtime. Just captains alone have taken up $500,000 in overtime. So there's, and between the whole department, actually, you know what, I'll take a step back from the line firefighters, but just those 2 alone, that's not, I just don't find that to be a healthy, fiscally responsible component of our budget or practice.
Well, again, we can look at it. I know of no town that does that, but it's a good suggestion. Appreciate it.
Okay. And again, the 8 or the captains and the battalion chiefs alone, like that $1 million that we spent in overtime, there are certain individuals that make $70,000 in overtime. Like that, I just don't see how that is. That's the reason why if we had a practice where we hired as we went, then we wouldn't be in this situation.
Well, I don't agree with that, but I think we can look at that and just understand that that overtime is not just based upon, not having that one individual that's there. As you said before, there's a lot of overtime that would be there regardless of what your staffing is. Mm-hmm. So, I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
Something that we can sit with the chief.
Okay.
And talk to see what he believes the positives and negatives are regarding
Okay.
that. So thank you.
All right. And related to new revenues, something that I brought up last year was the need to, obviously we have new construction and we have new developments throughout the town. But our master plan, in my opinion, is outdated. It has not been looked at. And as we begin to generate more revenue in areas such as warehousing or housing, we haven't factored in the holistic impact that it ends up having throughout the rest of the town, or the adverse impact that we can have on certain neighborhoods. So at what point, and I'm asking this just a year later because I remember asking you this last year, at what point do you think that it would be justified where we can revisit the master plan?
I believe by law we have to do it next year, 2021.
I get that by law we have to do it next year. I think that we're at the point where we need to initiate it right away because times have changed from the last 2 decades, or decade rather. And I get that we can have, certain modifications made to it, but again, the holistic impact that we end up having in various neighborhoods, like we even end up having, I know there's a certain neighborhood where the residences can justifiably, have tax appeals because of the adverse impact from other redevelopments.
We're going to disagree on that.
Okay, all right. And what other sources of revenues outside of development, such as warehouse or housing, have you and your administration looked at?
By other sources.
Yeah, what other sources of revenue outside of housing or construction-related revenues have you looked at? Like, have you looked at recreation programs? Have you looked at, I know we briefly mentioned turf fields, but just something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've looked at a number of things. Recreation is clearly one of them. Bringing in certain technology. I know you've brought up your optimum.
Municipal broadband.
Yes.
It's the second largest
Yes.
revenue generator.
See, I gave you. You gotta give me some kudos there for letting you put in the little marketing tip for that. So we constantly are looking at those types of things. As of now, as you see, we've had limited success.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Is there another question, or?
No.
No, I meant another question on that, because you're looking at me like you're expecting a different answer.
Well, I'm trying to gather. So when we were going through the finance committee conversations, one thing that I recognized was that recreation surprisingly brings in. It actually generates a revenue, and I get that it's not in every year because you're not going to have all of those programs every year. We obviously can't this year. But in general, there are ways that we can grow or generate revenue through things that are outside of basic taxation.
Correct, and we do look at those, but one of the things you have to recognize with bringing a lot of that in is when you first begin a project, it has a negative impact on your expenses and your revenue, and it would have a tax hit in the beginning. It's much like when you go, I mentioned before we were self-insured in health insurance. Some people say we should go into the state health plan or some other plan, and I'm not a believer in that, although we've looked at it. But that first year, when you have the run out, you have a tremendous hit to the tax base, and you increase taxes substantially. So when you provide an investment, that investment has a potential negative hit substantially before, and that generated revenue is not a guaranteed revenue stream. So a lot of what we've looked at and seen, we haven't had the ability because of the finances, and we also haven't had locations, because that's the other difficult thing in Edison is we don't have a lot of property to actually engage in some of these activities. You know, you're aware of that. So you run into some of those roadblocks. But we look, I mean, we sit routinely and look at, you know, alternative, you know, revenue, because that's the easiest way. You clearly don't affect your services, and you don't increase the taxes with the exception of the startup costs of that. So it is something we look at. We just have not concluded anything positive as far as doing those projects.
Okay. And my last question was related to grants and other funds that we have in our budget. Per the AFS of last year and the budget of this year, when I did the difference, there's still over $1.6 million worth of funds that we haven't touched. Now, this includes an item, for example, of a tree fund, right? So when I look at this, now I know that from last year it's 1.6 million, remains untouched. Those are simple improvements that we can utilize to beautify our town. What's the reason for not using that? And last year you had said that the reason was you wanted to accumulate a certain dollar amount so that you can use a larger portion the following year. And I understand that, but it still doesn't take into account the fact that there are improvements that we can make over time, and we have not done them.
We can. I think last year's answer was a great answer, so I'm sticking with that answer. But we clearly don't want to just use money that we have just to use it. We want to make sure that the project that we're going to use it on is a project that makes sense. You know, make sure that it's something that's going to be around for a while and, you know, is in the best interest of the township as a whole.
So out of the 1.6 million, do you have an idea or a vision for how you'd like to utilize any one of those line items?
I do.
So if you let me get a breakdown of the 1.6, I can answer your question.
Sure.
After the fact, because you know, I mean, except for the tree fund, I'm not sure where the remainder of them. I know we had a sidewalk fund, tree fund.
Sidewalks.
Yeah.
I mean, that's over a $250,000.
Yeah. Yeah, when we started putting sidewalks, then people wanted us to tear them out. So again, we want to make sure that we have the best use for those funds, not just use the funds because they happen to be there.
Okay.
You know, much like in the budgets I've showed you, is reserves aren't the worst thing to have because you can utilize them when you're in dire need.
That certainly makes sense.
Yeah.
Are you finished? though?
I'm done for my questions right now.
You did all your questions.
I may have others if another councilman brings anything up.
Council President.
Councilmember Joseph Coyle.
Thank you, Council President. I don't have a question at the moment. I just want to direct to the Finance Committee, just to help us and those listening and to not make questions redundant. Can you walk us through what happens in the Finance Committee? I'm not on the Finance Committee this year. What exactly have you gone over this year, or anyone can answer, so we know.
I think.
Councilmember,
I'm not directing straight to Mr.
No,
Joshi, but anyone is welcome.
he's the head. Councilmember Gomez.
I mean, just want to clarify that, so the Finance Committee meets with all the department heads, then we understand the mission of the departments, the services they provide. We focus on achievements for 2019, expenses, revenues, any associated line items that they might have. You know, if it's a revenue-generating department, using as an example, recreation, what is it that they provide as a service to the residents? And then what does it take to maintain that? And then the vision and plan and what they submit as a recommendation for 2020 in the current budget.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Brescher.
Yes, Council President, thank you. I have a few questions here. I lost track because I started numbering and I got
Is
3A
there only
and 4A.
one side or two sides of that?
It's just one side. But with the last question, if I can ask Councilman Gomez, so the Finance Committee reviewed this budget, right? And you guys felt comfortable enough with the administration to put this forward to us, correct?
The Finance Committee is in the process of reviewing this budget. We haven't finalized all our meetings. Our last meeting was last Thursday.
When would you anticipate that taking place so that then at that point, like I could really go through, you know, the budget? Because I don't want to go through it and then have you guys pick up stuff that I find. So I'd like to do that after you get to the real number that you feel comfortable that the administration would like to put forward. I understand that this right here is just a kind of a wish list, I guess.
Well, so, because I know you asked a question on the water stuff. So this is our, meaning the administration's budget that we feel is the best budget that we can put forth to you. You then, as a council body and through the Finance Committee, will then go through it, see what you agree with, see what you disagree with, and then.
Well, that's where my question came in, because that's what I thought the process was, that you would do it. The Finance Committee goes through it and makes their recommendations, comes to the rest of the council, but then I was told at the last meeting that the water thing, they didn't want to do. They wanted us all to do it. So I'm just looking for some kind of, you know, uniformity in how we move forward with it. But if we're doing this differently, I'm okay with it. I'm just asking for a date when you might anticipate having, you know, reviewed it and getting to a point where you feel comfortable and saying, I would approve these numbers.
Yeah, so we'll finish going through the final steps of the process, I'm gonna say probably within the next 2 weeks. And then we will give our comments back to you guys. Obviously, it'll be before the last council meeting, and then we can decide on how to approach it, when we might agree with or disagree. The reason why the water was, we didn't want the water bit to be limited to one-sided or one opinion. We felt that it was far more sensitive for you to have the attention that you might want, you know, might see further detail going in through it. So the recommendation is whatever the Finance Committee's getting, make sure that everybody else gets. So if there's anything that needs to be addressed in further detail, then go directly to the source. We didn't want to be the only ones that had an optic view in it.
Okay.
With this budget, what we'll do is we'll finish going through our meetings with the department heads, and then we'll give you our opinion of what we think, you know, whether it merits an amendment or not, or whether we're in agreement with what's being proposed, and then we can discuss and see what other points of view you might have, or any other council member might have.
Okay.
And then decide what we want to put forward.
Thank you. Then I have, I seen the slideshow, which was great, and we showed that 2019 tax rate that was strictly like a town by town, and in that slide you
This one or-
mentioned.
This one, or was it?
Tax rate comparison, I guess?
Just give him the page number.
Oh.
This one,
page-
okay, page 3.
Yeah, the one where, when I looked at it, you know, my initial thought was, you know, we're in the bottom tier on the tax portion, as far as taxing our residents compared to other towns in the county. Right? Like,
We're in the top
tax-
7. So when you say the bottom being good.
Right, what I'm asking for, and I guess you can get this for us, could you take out the school and county tax? Well, I guess the
Do
county
municipal.
tax would be all over, but the school tax, because I know the schools have like the lowest rate in the state, but I want to see that we're still sitting in a good
So
comparable
you just want to show the
position.
municipal side of it.
Municipal side
Yep.
only.
Okay.
Just for the comparison
Yep,
to
I
see
can do
whether
that.
it's something we really need to look at,
Yep.
or we're sitting in a pretty good position right now.
Yeah. Just to mention, because some of the towns have fire districts, so I'm going to make sure that everything is apples to apples.
That's fine,
Okay?
yes. Thank
Like
you.
Woodbridge has fire districts rather
Yes.
than, so, okay. Yeah, we can do that.
My question is, we have a department, a DPW department, and they're I guess, they're charged with maintaining our town. Have they had a headcount increase in the last few years?
No.
And, okay, the reason why I ask is, we heard, I guess, that we need headcount and we need to be up to the staffing levels that we were. And my personal feeling about this town is, over the last 4 or 5 years, I feel just as safe today as I did yesterday. I do feel that my infrastructure is falling apart, so I believe that there's a need to have improvements there. I noticed some great work they were doing on that basketball court, because as opposed to ripping the basketball court out and putting a new one in, they're actually maintaining it, which is a great, great thing. And that would bring me to my next question. I noticed in the budget, I guess, the police department, there was money that we transferred out. Now, how did we end up with extra money in their budget? And do you have that number, Maureen? I think it was like $1 million something that
I
we
do.
transferred out, $1.5 million, something like that?
That was transferred into the health insurance line.
Okay, but we had it in the police department's budget. So my question is, where did it come from? Now, I do know that you pay overtime. I heard my council colleague talk about overtime. But when you pay the overtime and you don't increase that headcount, overall, does your budget, you create a surplus in that division? Like, we might pay $300,000 in overtime, but at the end of the day, you're saving $1.1 million by not having to pay the salaries
By not
and
filling.
benefits. That's correct, right? Okay. Now, we talked about headcount before for DPW. We didn't increase anything. In our police department, can I get what our headcount was in 2017 and 18 and where we are today? And let me tell you where I'm going with it. I'm in agreement that we do need to maintain our safety and keep everything safe and everything like that. But if we were short, say, 10 people in 2017, and we were short 10 people in 2018, and this year we're short 20, to be quite honest with you, I feel comfortable in you hiring 10, because like I said, I felt just as safe a couple years ago. I don't feel any less safe today than I did a couple of years ago. So I'd just like to see what that head count was that you had in total
Okay.
for 2017, 2018, and 2019, because I know we're looking for people.
Because we did hirings every year for the most part, where in that year you take that snapshot is going to be important. Meaning if we hired in June, if you took that snapshot in May, you may have found 155. After we hired, you might find 180.
You can give me that before and after?
Okay, so I was just going to
that
say,
I
so
can
we'll
do-
show you the into the year, how many we hired and how many we ended up with.
Right, like where I'm going with
Yeah,
it
because
is...
when I came into office, we were in like the 150s in that
I believe
range.
so.
We had gotten up into the low 180s, which is where we felt we needed to be. We've now dropped down into the high 150s, which is why we have a number of people that we're looking to bring on with the new hiring.
Right.
But we, I think, got into that higher number during 17 and 18. I think after the first few hirings, we got there. But we can get you the specific numbers.
Right, that's where I'm going. I just
Okay.
feel comfortable with that. I don't know what...
I just want to
year-
make sure it's, I don't want to distort it by saying, hey, we're going to pick, the end of the year or the beginning of the year, because those hirings are going to be significant.
Right, you can give that
So we'll give it to you. Okay, perfect.
both ways there. My council colleague did talk about the COVID, where we will be reimbursed funds that technically, my impression was that it was going to come out of this budget. Now, I was a little shocked this evening when you told me that you didn't anticipate any of the COVID money in this budget. And the reason why I say that is we're talking about June. Now, I mean, you did make this document, I guess, like a week or two ago, but COVID hit in March. So we did have the anticipated time of our OEM and everybody that was in there spending hours of overtime. So I believe it just should have been in this budget. So I understand it's not.
So because we really believe wholeheartedly, because we've been on enough calls to know what we're getting reimbursed, we felt it was a wash, therefore there was no need to include it. So the net impact would have not hit this budget.
And I just want to point
Mike,
out, do you
okay.
remember the, very early in March, the state gave us the ability to use our snow trust fund?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
that's where, that's the money we're using right now. I didn't feel to artificially inflate the budget when I had those funds. That's what we're using at
So
this
if-
time.
So when you would get that money reimbursed by whoever it might be, that would go not back into our snow trust fund, but it would go into a surplus. It would be a cushion for you that you could
It'd
use
go
in the
back into
future.
whatever that trust fund will be called eventually. You know,
Okay.
they have us calling it, you know, whatever they have us calling it now. And hopefully, the reimbursement we would get for the overtime would go right back into the budget.
Okay.
I mean, that's our plan anyway.
And then I'm gonna make a request of the mayor and the administration. I was not aware about this 10%. So when you increased our ratables,
The county, you mean?
yes. I would ask that you ask the people out here to hold our county officials accountable for this, to make sure that we're receiving the funds back here to Edison, and whether that would be parks. Maybe they'd like to build us the community center that we can't really do, the futuristic one, or maybe pave more of our roads. But I think, you know, now that I see that we're paying them more, I want more from the county.
Yeah, we've had that conversation, not just with the freeholders, but I had the conversation with the county administrator, pointing out that this 10% increase is not fair. And we obviously deserve money in return to pay for our services. And I specifically mentioned the community center, because at the time, that was kind of at a higher priority. And whatever an assurance from an official means, but we were given the assurance that that would happen. But yes, I think we need to keep the pressure on, and as you said, make sure everybody's aware. And they recognize this year was very unique, because in the past it didn't stick out that much. Our increase was very close to what the county increase was. Whether we got back what we paid or not, that's a different story. But this year was very unique. Our valuation and our values were so dramatically higher than every other town that it stuck out. But I agree, we need to make sure that we get back the monies that we're due.
Okay. Another question. I noticed that we had some improvements to Heller Park and I guess New Dover Road. Are those fully funded by outside grants, or is there a cost associated to those with Edison, and what would that be?
They weren't fully funded.
They were almost fully funded. I think Heller Park, I can get you that breakdown, but we got a lot of money for those projects. Heller and Raritan Center, but I can get you the breakdown.
Yeah, I'd like to see what they are, and can you get me a list of what they are? Like in
Sure.
Dover Road, since that does affect me personally, it's right around the corner from me.
Okay.
I don't know what kind of improvements we're planning on doing on the Dover Road.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically your repaving, reconstructing your sidewalks, your handicap ramps, you know,
And the
Types of-
repaving that.
and repaving.
The whole road? You know why I asked that? Because that road was paved
Yeah, it wouldn't be the
maybe
whole.
5 or 7
It
years.
wouldn't be the whole road, it would be a section, because much like when we received DOT money for Talmadge Road, that was over a 3 or 4 year period of time, and that came in different stages, which is why it was paved and improved over a 3 or 4 year period of time.
Okay, yeah.
And
if I can
Councilman-
But we
get-
can get you exactly.
I actually have it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, Heller Park, we got a grant for $900,000. And again, we haven't gone out to bid yet, but the engineer's estimate is 1.2. So we're looking at maybe putting in 300,000. Hopefully, the bids will come in better than that.
And if the bids come in less, like if the bids came in at 900,000, then the cost to us would be,
Well, the grants for 900, the cost for us would be zero.
okay. You did talk about, you have a plan for the maintenance of our buildings and our parks. I'd like to get a copy of that plan. I've opened the plan. My council colleague told me that we had a facilities and maintenance plan. I don't know really what you would call it, but it's not a facilities and maintenance plan. Maybe a kind of sort of wish list. So I'd like to see what you were alluding to when you said that you have a plan for our buildings and parks. Because again, like I said, our one community center failed. Our other one has a column in the middle of a gym in there that's holding up the roof that's been there for quite some time. So I just feel that we've been neglecting, and everybody here that comes in points to my council chambers that we all are in. So, you know, I'd like to see the improvements, I guess, in our buildings in that.
Okay.
And that would be it. And I thank you
That's it?
for your time. Yes. I'll have more as I go through this after my finance committee goes through it. Then I'll share with them and I'll share with you.
Okay.
But I'll turn it back to our
Okay.
council president.
Mayor Lankey,
Yes.
if you hire 20 people and 10 people retire, will you still be at a deficit?
If 10 additional people retire?
Yeah, if you hire 20 people and 10
Yes.
people like down the road retire, I'm just saying, because I'm in education too, and when a certain amount of people retire, you have to replace them, you know. I guess we're on a different schedule, we're on a 10-month schedule. But I just said, if you hire 20, and then you happen to have 10 retire, or either within that 10, maybe 3 of them get sick and have to leave, so that would be a deficit. Now, I'm trying to find somewhere in for my 3 pet peeves, my quality of life stuff, so I'm trying to get grants. So over here, they're telling me that you got a little bit extra money left over. You know, they're telling me that on this side of the room, so I'll talk to you after the meeting about my quality of life projects. That's good for Edison Township. If they find the extra nickels, I'll be happy to take them.
Don't listen to what they say.
Wait for another round of questions.
Excuse me. Councilmember Patel?
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Mayor. This is a wonderful presentation. As usual, this is my 5th year in a row looking at the similar presentation. Your slide number 20 says the majority of the township reserves is used to balance 2020 budget. We are talking about the reserve or it's somewhere surplus? I just want to use the correct term here. Are we using reserve or are we using surplus?
Both.
Both?
Both.
So my next question is, what is our reserve balance as of December 31st, 2019, and what is our surplus balance as of December 31st, 2019?
So,
Because I can see the surplus balance is $8.2 million for 2019.
right, of which 7.3 million is utilized in this year's budget, so about 90%. Page 12, Councilman. I don't know if this will answer your question. But some of those other reserves, like the reserve for debt service for 104,000, those are reserves that are brought in to this budget
Right.
that are reserves, so to speak.
Correct, but what is our balance as of December
Are you saying
2019?
the balance prior to that?
Yes.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm gonna say that there's no balance after the reserves because they were mostly used or totally used. I think the mostly was on the surplus, but I can get you the exact number just in case I'm speaking in error.
Thank you, Mayor. My next question is the 2020, the anticipated surplus is $7.2 million. So we'll be generating the surplus, or will be using majority of that or all of that?
Right, so we're using 7 million of the 8 million in this year's budget.
So we'll be left out with close to $1 million in the balance.
Say that again.
So we'll
I'm
be
sorry.
left out with $1 million in the surplus.
Yeah, wait, I'm gonna get you the exact
$1
number.
million left, but that's restricted. The state would only let us use the 7.
Okay. Because if I recollect, in 2019, we did the similar thing, most
We
of
used
the-
8 of the 9, I think, that year, yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
So this is the trend. I can see that, we are using most of the surplus year over year.
Which is not a good plan, but
Correct.
it is the plan to try to reduce the tax burden as much as possible.
My next question is on the revenue side, because I want to be realistic. The budget is budget. The revenues are the projected revenue, but I hope administration has done some due diligence in terms of looking the realistic revenues here. Just to give an example, the latchkey program. Normally it's a 2.1, 2.2. That's our average I have seen in last 4 or 5 years. This year we are projecting $1 million. Knowing the COVID situation, the schools are closed. We don't know what's going to happen in the rest of the year, during the rest of the year. So do we know the Q1 number? So what is the basis of putting this $1 million? It could come as $250,000. It could be $500,000, and we'll have a hole in the budget.
Right, it's our best guess as far as what the year is gonna be. It's our best estimate based upon.
So do we know the Q1 amount, how much
The Q1?
latchkey generated, Q1?
I can get that for you.
Yeah, and we just did a refund at one of the council meetings, so I'll get that number for you.
Thank you, Maureen.
Just for latchkey, Councilman?
Yes, yeah, latchkey number, and I'll go back on the construction as well. But now the second one is on the JFK building lease payment. Is that lease expiring anytime soon? It's $64,000. This is on our,
Musgrave, that doesn't expire exactly, does it?
No.
Okay.
No, the way it was set up is each party, the way it was set up is each party can cancel with the amount of notice. I don't remember the exact amount of notice, but notice to the other party. The idea when we first negotiated was there was a push to get legislation passed to deal with that. So we both anticipated that it was going to come out in somebody's favor, and then we both wanted, the ability to remove ourselves. We can remove ourselves at a period of time, Councilman. I don't remember the exact period of time. We just have to give them notice, and we can pull out.
but as my council colleague said that, we need to find a way to generate the revenue. And, some of these areas, if we don't have the agreement, I can see the JFK reimbursement for dispatch service. That's pretty much is a flat last few years. Is there a room for us to renegotiate lease, a JFK reimbursement in dispatch service?
We certainly can, we can approach them and see what they say. The problem was that there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of cost to pursue the tax appeal. So what we did was we took the amount that was in the legislation that was in Trenton at the time, multiplied that. It was a per bed number. Multiplied that by what was at JFK, and that's how we struck the number.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. My next question, Mayor, is again on the revenue, uniform construction code and fees. As we know that we have close to 30, 40 cases pending in front of the planning board. Really nothing has been moved in terms of the construction, and I'm not blaming the administration for that. It is due to the COVID. There were no planning zoning meetings there. We are anticipating $5.3 million or $5.4 million in 2020. Again, looking at the numbers, is this a realistic number again? So I would like to really know what is your Q1 number. Again, I'm basing a lot of those things on the quarter one, because that's only the known thing in 2020 at this point in time.
We can get you the quarter one numbers for that. That's a little unique though, because you don't have a valve that gets shut off. You still have revenue coming through with the constructions that's going on at that point in time. And we do, some areas you will recapture the revenue that you lost. In other areas you won't. That's one area we believe that, we will recapture the revenue that we would have gotten during that period that they were closed down. Whereas latchkey is one that we wouldn't.
Right.
So, but we can get you the Q1.
So, thank you, Mayor. This is what we budgeted was $4.9 million in 2019, but realistically we collected 5.8 million, so it's $1 million plus there. It was an additional revenue that was generated, so I'm a little concerned here that it was, yes, the additional revenue was generated in 2019, but 2020 we are expecting $500,000 less than what it realized in 2019. So want to make sure that we really going to generate that. My only worry is hopefully by third quarter you will not come back and say, no, we didn't really get that revenue and we need another tax increase. So as practical as possible, we need to be there.
So just so you know that was what was budgeted.
Correct.
We realized a higher amount. We realized over 5 million, about 5.5 million. So I hear what you're saying, and it doesn't take away that I need to get the information for you. But we feel comfortable still with that number. I would say that our philosophy is fairly conservative. So hopefully they come through. But you know what, Q1 will, I guess, tell a lot about that, and we'll get that for you.
Thank you, Mayor. The other thing is on the general revenues. There are a lot of one-time items, like 2019 NJDOT, the fund that we're getting for the Heller Park and Return Center, as Councilman said here, Brescher, that's a $1.2 million. I understand the budgeting process, you need to include all these line items, but most of them they do offset because we do get the grants, correct? But the flip side of that is it increased the baseline number of the budget. So just to give an example, right? See, if the budget is $100 million, and if I'm getting $10 million one-time revenue, so my baseline becomes $110 million for the next year, which that 10 million I'm not going to get because that's 10 million one time. So the subsequent year now, we will be looking for that additional $10 million revenue because that's a shortfall now. So I understand you have to be within the budget framework, but this really inflate the budget. That's my own, I would say the point here. I don't know what the realistic is because I can see for 2020, there are half of the line items here, we don't have the amount because we can't, some of the things where we got in 2019, just to give an example, non-point pollution control and management, $65,000. Maybe it was a one point in time revenue. There is none in 2020. So Mayor, my question is, with this all one-time revenue items, is there a way for us to separate those, especially the one which are going to offset the cost, so we don't increase our baseline budget number?
So there's no way, I mean, state regulations obviously call for how the budget needs to be, so it needs to be in there. We do obviously look at those one-time, which is why I have that one slide about one-time revenue. So we recognize when there is a one-time, whether it be a grant or special aid or utilizing a reserve, and know that we can't count on it year after year.
Right.
So we do make sure that we're not, looking at that base, so to speak, increasing. We look at it almost in a subtotal, as you're saying, which is why it's in the other revenue area,
Right.
because it's separated out.
Thank you, Mayor, and I think I have only a couple of questions left here. State aid, I've seen the budget, which is pretty much similar to what we got in 2019. Are we sure we are going to get the same state aid in 2020? Any word?
We believe we will.
Okay. Because again, if it drops, there will be a big hole in the budget.
They're telling us to anticipate what we received last year.
Okay, perfect. So that's the good thing that will happen.
But again, you asked the word, are we certain? I'm not certain about anything when it comes from the state.
Okay. So coming back to the Department of Law. This is on the appropriations. There is a close to is 740,000 and 103. So if I add up that, it's close to $850,000 we spent on the legal services. And I think, you know, some of that portion was for Suez, because it is in the other expense item, $190,000. This is on the sheet number 13 from the original budget, if you'd like to see that. So there are two line items here, salaries and wages and other expense.
Okay.
So if you have spent anything on the Suez related expenses, I believe they should not be carried forward in 2020 because I see it's a flat carryover from 2019, same numbers. I'm looking at $103,021 and $740,000.
So it shouldn't be in it. We'll double check, but I don't think there's any Suez-related legal fees in there, but we'll double check to make sure.
Okay. If there are any law-related expense, they should be reflected in 2019 actuals here or
for Suez.
appropriation, correct? Okay, I'll wait for the answer.
Yeah.
Thank you. And this is not a small number, but I've looked at the Department of Recreation and Parks. Is the expense related to heat, light, and power. It's dropped from $945,869 to $625,000. I assume our one center is already closed. Telton is already closed. Minnibyville, it's closed for Q1, Q2. I'm not sure about Q3. So are we talking, these are the utility expenses or?
The bulk of that would be due to the buildings that we're no longer operating.
All right. So are we anticipating any further drop in the expense? Because it's still $625,000, which is 25% haircut from the last budgeted amount. It should be substantially more if the buildings are closed for another quarter or so.
Again, that's one of those things. I know every now and then we don't agree necessarily. I hear your philosophy.
Right.
At this point, this was how comfortable we were reducing it.
And I'll go back with the Q1 bills and probably extrapolate from that number.
Yeah, I was going to say we can probably go back and look at some of that, and we can have that conversation with information rather than philosophy.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
I have a last question, though.
You do?
Yes, on the insurance. I know Councilman Brescher is working, and he did ask some numbers here. Do we know our average per employee insurance cost compared to the Board of Education, which has a very different model here? I understand there are different philosophies. One is self-funded versus other is insured.
We can get that. I don't know what relevance that has, but we can get it.
Okay. That's it. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I thought there was a lot of questions.
Hmm?
Didn't you say you had a lot more questions?
No, I have, but because
right.
most of them are based on the Q1 numbers. And if I get the same answer, there's no point in asking those
Okay,
questions.
well, send us a list of,
Yes.
of areas that you want us to gather that information, and that way we can get it all at once.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you, Councilor.
Yeah, thank you.
At this time, Council Member Deal, would you like to ask any questions? All right, thank you. I didn't want to leave you out. Anyone else? All right, then we can open to the public. Yeah. All right. All right, we'll just close this.
Council President?
Oh, okay.
Before I spoke, I wanted to know if there was anybody from the Finance Committee that had any other questions.
Excuse me?
Is there any questions from the Finance Committee? I want to yield my time to our Finance Committee first, so my questions aren't redundant. Do you have any questions first, Ms.
About what?
Ship?
Oh, about the finance? Oh,
I want to ask some questions. I was just going to yield my time to the Finance Committee. You're on the Finance Committee first.
Councilmember Gomez, you had anything else since you're the head of the finance?
I do not, ma'am, thank you.
All right.
Oh, I had one comment to
All
make,
right.
or a question rather. This was pertaining to our technology. It is of my belief that the technology that we use in certain departments is archaic, and the process is so ancient that it is baffling to me because it ends up costing more long-term, and it's frustrating. So in terms of long-term planning, for example, engineering, permits, zoning, departments where we use manual applications and people manually respond with emails. Have you considered, you being the administration, has the administration considered or actively looked at systems that other cities such as New York, Jersey City, Philadelphia, Miami have, where you can, you know, a developer can, from start to finish, complete the entire application online? Or that itself, over time, like over a substantial amount of time, we can save a substantial amount of money just by automating certain processes.
Right. So who says we don't agree on something? Because I do agree with you on that, and I stated before that we were in the 19th century, I think. So I agree wholeheartedly, and it is something that we're starting to look at. We honestly haven't gone out and looked at Miami or New York City, but we've started looking at, you know, towns that are similar in makeup, size, and whatnot to see what they're utilizing, what they're doing. I think technology is something that we need to look at as a whole, individually, across the board. I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And as you know, I'm not a tech person, but, you know, I know that it's archaic. So I agree wholeheartedly with you, and we are looking at it, and, you know, maybe even we can develop some kind of council committee. I know you guys like having committees to start looking at technology and looking at moving us forward. So
Okay.
I agree with you on that.
Thanks. And Councilman Brescher, just to address your question with the Finance Committee, it's not that the three of us meet and we have a conversation, we learn from the directors, but it's not that we put our stamp of approval on it. So far, we haven't had like a vote such as that. So you can make an amendment or suggest something from that budget, because that budget came from the mayor. It is now the council's budget. So if we're a committee that just examines it a little bit further, but if you have a recommendation, we're all ears.
I'm just trying to get a hold of the process, because I came from the Board of Education, where what would happen would be the Finance Committee would sit down with the administration and would come up with numbers and approved numbers. And at the end of the day, what it was like they would have 4 people on their Finance Committee. So they needed to sell it to the other people, you know, on the Board of Education to get them so that they had an agreement, and they would end up with 5 votes. Here at the council, you need 4 votes. And if 3 people are on the Finance Committee and you believe, you know, in your whole heart that this is a great budget, or if you believe that it should be cut by whatever it is, and you make those recommendations to the rest of your council members, your colleagues, you know, we take that with a grain of salt that you did your due diligence, and you probably acquire the fourth vote that would be needed. Now, if what you're telling me you want me to do is you want me to schedule time to meet personally with the mayor, with Maureen, and with every director. Now, Maureen knows I have no problem doing all of this, and I will actually sit through and go through and sift through each and every line item like I did with the water. But then I would just have asked to have been on the Finance Committee, because that's the work I would have done when I was there. So what I'm asking the Finance Committee is to give me that document at a point where you feel comfortable in saying that, you know, this is where we would like to move forward. Not looking for, you know, I'm looking for you to do your job on that committee. And I'll take your recommendations, and then I'll look at them. So that's what I was looking for.
Well, yeah, I understand that, and I understand when I listen, everybody's asking the same identical question, so
We are.
So we're taking note of everybody, same identical questions, and as Councilmember Joshi said, nothing's written in stone, all right? And you gotta understand, like the school budget and our budget is totally different at all, because we, the public, don't get, so if you want a 7.5% increase along with a referendum, we don't get to say anything. We have to go with it. The only thing different about the council that, you know, is more voted on.
Well, I think both of the budgets are the same. Maureen, there's a cap that we have here on the municipal side, correct? Yes. And the Board of Education, I know, has a cap. It's the same cap?
I believe it's exactly the same cap.
Okay.
10.
Right, so it needs approval by the council. And, right, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for my council colleagues on that Finance Committee to put forward something that you feel comfortable in voting for, and explain to us then why it's, you know, why it's good. And we'll give you, you know, you heard some of our concerns here. Any concerns that I send to the administration over the next couple of weeks, I will send to the entire Finance Committee so that you can then vet that out. You know, and then you can get back to me and say, you know, Richie, listen, you know, I think we really need this, or whatever it is, just so that I feel comfortable in supporting what the Finance Committee would put forward. That's what I'm asking.
And that, Councilman Brusher, yes, that is normally the process every year that we go through it. And again, I described, we meet with the directors, we get our own interpretation of what we recommend. And obviously, we will share that with all of you individually, and then we work through it to make sure that they're in agreement. And, you know, you look at some years, you get some people to agree with you and align, there are other people that do not, right? So but we do go through the process. You're absolutely correct. Our function is we get an understanding and we form an opinion of what we recommend to put forward, whether we put an amendment, or there might be things specific that we'll work through with you on, you know, specific items that you're looking at. And then we'll get a perspective, and then we decide how we want to proceed with that. But that's the function. And I think the comment that Councilman Joshi was, of course, you're going to have your independent view and your own independent questions. We'll share with you what our opinion and our assessment is, and then we put our heads together and put something that it's in the best interest of the budget and the residents. So, but yes, we'll be reaching out to you as we go through the process.
All right, thank you.
And keep in mind, it's separate from the Board of Ed, in where they may come to a consensus, we may not. Councilman Gomez may disagree with something that Council President has to say, whereas we may not come to a consensus, but it's the mayor's budget. When it's introduced to the council, it is then our ability and time to make recommendations on it. And if we don't agree at all, then the budget would theoretically fail, or we can approve the mayor's budget. It's his budget that comes to the legislative.
Well, okay, no, and I'll tell you what, it is exactly like the Board of Education.
Okay.
They don't come to a consensus every day.
Okay.
I don't know that we will, but what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the people on the Finance Committee to come and tell me this is a good budget, or tell me, no, this is not a good budget, and here's the reason why, Richie. That's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
I'm looking for you guys to do what you signed up to do with that budget, and to give me that input. And that's all I want to be clear about. At the end of the day, if you feel that the budget needed to be cut by 2% and two of the other people felt it was fine the way it is, I respect that, but I want you to tell me why it should be cut by that 2%. I'm looking for, because you're part of that finance committee, that's why I'm looking for that input from you. You don't need to have a consensus, just can be individuals, really.
Oh, that makes sense. I just want you to know that you have the ability to motion for an amendment
Right.
at any time.
But I think you're absolutely, which is what we do every year. We'll give our opinion, and then we share what our findings are. But you're right, that's the function of the committee. And that's with any of the other
Yeah.
committees, so.
I think it's better that we hear, not just the mayor, that we hear the actual directors that have a budget. Like with the school, everybody's over top of their budget. It's like mini budgets within the system. So I think it's better for me to ask the directors what they actually need back and forth, because I know I'm gonna ask the mayor, this is the mayor and the council's budget, but unless he gets the input from the directors and the different people that hold positions within the whole administration, it'd be kind of hard for him to fill the budget out.
Right, and
So
you'll
that's,
see, right, like some of the questions I asked, like I would ask you personally, like the DPW, right? I've seen that, our building and grounds and stuff have been falling apart. So my question to you is, did you speak to the director? And if they're telling you that they're fine with the amount of money that they're looking to appropriate, which is the same as last year, how could they say that we're going to make the town better if we're proposing the same thing we had last year? Now that's in the opposite direction of the way most people are talking about the budget. That would be increasing the budget.
That can be an amendment. You can increase the budget for the
Right,
DPW.
that would be a difference.
Councilman Brescia.
But that's just one example. So yes,
We're in agreement, absolutely.
yeah, when you get that, I guess in a couple of weeks, you said.
Yeah.
Yeah,
if
and
you
as
can
as
share
soon
that.
as soon as we start wrapping up and have an opinion, we'll start reaching out. So,
Perfect.
definitely.
Thank you. Councilmember Coyle, you wanted to?
Thank you,
ask some
Council
questions?
President. While we're on that subject, I just have, I guess, a few questions before I direct to the mayor. But for the Finance Committee, and I guess I first want to direct to you, Councilman Joshi, and I can appreciate you pointing out the different overtimes and departments and stuff. Although we all vie to be on the Finance Committee, not all of us get there, and you're on the Finance Committee. And do you go through, was it enough time, enough meetings? Do you go through department by department? Just walk me through your experience. And you don't have to answer. I'm just trying to get a grip on before I politely adjust my questions, not attack, adjust to the mayor. Do we go through workflow processes? Do we go through each and every department? Do they have to take their haircut first?
You want me to
Yes.
answer? Okay. So we went through, the question is, what's the process? We had several meetings, and we go, as we all introduce the mayor's budget, we go over that with every director, and they give the same material to yourself that we get, and we just have an opportunity to, the three of us would collectively answer question or ask questions to the directors. But that's not to say that you cannot. I encourage you to, because I did last year as well. I will, feel free to go around to every director. That just means that the three of us have looked at it perhaps a little bit in a different way than you may have. That's really it.
I think,
Thank
Councilman, can I make a comment? To Council President, I think, this is mayor's budget, mayor presented, if you have, again, this is my personal opinion, if we can leave the logistic part for us to discuss, maybe behind the scene, and let's talk more about the budget. Let's give people a chance to ask the questions. And any councilman can ask the question on the budget, but again, we don't want this meeting to be a 6 hours meeting, the way it happened last time. So
Yes.
if we can be specific to the agenda, because there are people in the audience, maybe listening to the live stream, so we need to respect each other's time. And again, this is my personal opinion. Again, any council member can say anything. And apologies if I'm not letting you speak, but that's not my intent, Councilman. Feel free to continue your discussion.
Councilmember Patil, I agree with you, but I can't cut off anybody up here. But I do agree with you. I do not want the audience to sit there all night long because we have more opportunities than they have to ask questions. And they spent their precious time coming here tonight, spending it with us. And, we had a kind of long one last time, and I don't think they got to really participate in our last council meeting. So I agree with you.
Councilman Coyle,
Go ahead.
apologies again.
Go ahead, Councilmember Coyle.
I was only 90 seconds into my questions. I usually get cut off at 35. Council President, just tell me the appropriate time you yield to me to speak, and I will just keep it within that time frame. I don't want the residents of Edison, I don't know how many are here right now, but I think there's more department heads than there are people. But I just want to make sure I'm doing my job for the 100,000 residents.
Somebody got insulted when you just said that.
It's okay, just tell me the time.
Somebody just got insulted when you said that. When you said there are more department heads than people.
I think there is more department
No,
heads.
it may not be, but it's not good to make a statement like that because we don't want to, do the audience that way. We just don't want to treat them in that manner at all. No, I mean, because I want them to see that we have the quorum that we have, among us. We don't want them, we appreciate every single person who came out tonight. I want you to know that. Thank you.
Council President, I'm just going to keep.
And the last thing I'm going to tell you, I can't limit your time at all. I just tell people to be respectful of the audience. I cannot cut your time or any other council person's time. Thank you.
Council President, I'm going to do my best to keep within 12 minutes, which I think is fair for 100,000 residents who elect to put us here for an important moment where we raise taxes or don't raise taxes. Thank you, Council President, for your patience. Mayor Lankey, thank you for your presentation. You did a wonderful job, very similar to a few years back, which is some differences I can appreciate. Can you tell me what the total revenue increase of taxes what is the total amount we're trying to increase to meet your budget?
The total tax rate, the total tax?
The total revenue, the total amount.
The amount to be raised from taxes, you mean?
Yes.
It's a little over
for this
seven.
increase.
It's like $7.5 million. Actually, I have a 12-minute answer. If I could give the 12-minute answer and use all your 12 minutes, I would.
No, that's fine.
You sure?
I'm satisfied with your answer. Some points I want to get to with the $7.5 million is that, if we just go back department by department, will you be meeting with every department, or have you met with every department already to have them reduce their budget and/or take a haircut on overtime or anything that you feel would be necessary to lower this increase?
So basically, the process is that all the departments meet, they discuss what they believe they need. We obviously don't have them shoot for the stars. We tell them what the least that they are able to run their departments at. So we believe that that's this budget, otherwise we wouldn't have presented it. Clearly, if you're going to reduce the budget further, we would have to go back and have them reduce further, but since the first go-around was give us the budget you need to provide the services we're currently providing, we believe that would have an impact on services.
Okay.
Does that answer the question? No.
It sounds like you've met with every department, and this is their presentation from each department.
The
and this is
departments
the best they
are
can present.
involved in the creation of their budget.
I know years back I discussed an economic development person to increase our opportunities of ratables coming to Edison. I think Councilman Patil brought up a good point. We're not meeting with the planning board as much. Is there any, in your budget, with making this opportunity for construction fees to be more certain, is there any room in your budget that you'll have an economic development person involved to prospect opportunities for Edison and/or recruit people to bring in ratables?
So you're talking about hiring a person specific for economic
Is that
development?
in the budget?
That's not in the budget.
when I talk about snow that's in the DPW and the purchases we make during the snow season, we didn't have a snow season this year. Was there anything anticipated to go in savings? I mean, we didn't have any overtime, we didn't have. I think
That's what we
did
used for the COVID. Yeah. So the overtime numbers have been reduced. The snow emergency numbers were what were used to fund the COVID numbers.
Now, a few council people brought up a good point with the county and the $100 million that they have. Do you know the criteria that's going to be for us trying to get some of that money? Is there a certain criteria that we fall into? Or is it just reimbursements
The county,
for COVID, or we don't know yet at all?
for specific COVID reimbursement?
I mean, of the 140 million they have, we're being
Right.
told 100 million will be allocated for the towns. There's
Right.
25 towns.
Right.
If you divide it by, we'd all get $4 million,
Yeah.
which is probably impossible to believe. But
Yeah, because you're only reimbursed for your, like I said before, your actual expenses related specifically to COVID over that period of time. And then they will look at what expenses you're going to be making in the future to help make the town and the municipal building and whatnot safer. So they will not just take your actual expenses, but look at improvements or expenses that you will be outlaying in the future and make a decision based upon what fund is left and approve based upon what they believe or, almost, I think they're going to rank of what they believe are priorities that people should move into. So do we know? We've had conversations, numerous conversations with them as far as what they want to see, how they want to see it. So I would say, yes, we do know what they're going to be looking at, how they're going to be looking at it, but we don't know specifically what they're going to be reimbursing us.
do we have an advocate or a strategy to negotiate with the county to make sure we get our fair share? No different than this 10% that they take each year, and us being one of the highest of what they get from the COVID money and or the 10%. Is there an advocate, aside from you, is there something we can do differently to make sure we put our foot down, that the taxpayers of Edison get that fair share?
I think it's through your normal business and political influence. Obviously, grants are involved, so our grant people will be involved also. So the strategy is to, hit them from all of those sides. But as you know, sometimes things work when you sit individually with people and negotiate and make your case. So we're going to make a strong case, the strongest case, and I would say that the fact that they increased our taxes for the county 10%, I think would put us in a good negotiating standpoint.
I know in the past we talked about workflow management in each department. I think we were doing a workflow study years back. Has that been completed?
Not yet.
Is that something that's still in the works, or is it something we postpone with?
It's still in the works.
Okay. And going back to the Department of Law here, I see as Councilman Patil brought up, is the $740,000 a year. Is that just our expensive, of our in-house counsel?
It's all. Yeah. No, it's all our legal costs. When you say our,
I mean, is that Mr. Northgrave's contract? What part of, what
as well
share
as-
revenue is Mr. Northgrave's or?
when you say revenue,
I'm sorry, not revenue, I meant
Okay.
the actual expense.
okay.
It's $740,000. We paid $549 and we've reserved $190.
That's, the 330 is attributed to Mr. Northgrave's firm, coming out of the current account. Not escrows, not capital, just the current fund alone.
What was the total amount his firm was paid last year? Is
I can
it
get
the
that for you.
549 or is it?
No, we
I have
can
to
get that for you.
I guess what I'm getting at, is this more than one firm, or is it just Mr. Northridge's firm?
It's more than,
This line is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Five firms.
5 firms are within there?
Mm-hmm.
And can I have a breakdown of that next week when you have time?
Okay.
Councilman Patil brought up JFK. I wasn't sure if he was talking about the actual lease of the building in Raritan Center, or was he talking about their tax payments we receive?
He's talking about the host community benefit, I think, the 500,000.
Is there intentions for that increasing?
We just talked about that before, right?
There's an existing contract for an existing amount, Councilman, and both parties retain the right to terminate that contract, renegotiate, do whatever at any point that either side feels that it's not in their interest.
They lease our building down at Raritan Center, a brand-new facility that I don't think ever used. I believe that lease was about $200,000 a year. Does that plan to increase at all?
The last time we redid their contract, we did increase those. I think there's one more year on the current contract we have.
So are you saying we have another 12 months before we can renegotiate?
Correct.
Okay. And do you know what that payment is today?
I do. Just trying to get to it in my sheets. Sorry. It's like,
I'm yielding my time. I'm at 10 minutes.
Go ahead. You
She's
can ask
taking
another question. Let's just give you 2
longer
seconds
to find this
it.
answer, Council President.
Yeah, you can get it from her tomorrow.
I'm kidding. I can get it tomorrow. Maureen, it's not a problem. I can get it tomorrow.
No, I have
I
it.
do want to sum up.
It's $236,640 for the dispatch services and $64,464 for the lease payment. Sorry, my pages were out of order.
This question may refer to some directors, and I don't need this answered directly in detail. But I know we have overtime in different departments, and perhaps someone later can come up from the fire department. But I know we're held to some standards, but are we also having overtime issues because of the lack of manpower and/or we have enough staff, but someone's on sick leave, someone's unavailable? What is the reasoning behind the overtime in the fire department? Because I hear some is excusable because of the nature of people on vacation and you can't just control the manpower workflow scheduling. Is that fair to say?
so overtime is obviously based upon what your minimum staffing would be. And you need to bring people in to meet that minimum staffing. And, as you said, the various reasons that you may not be at that minimum staffing. Could be because your workforce is down, could be because you have people out. I mean, during COVID, obviously, we had a number of people out. So you would have a heightened overtime at that point in time.
Thank you, Mayor. I kept my time to 12 minutes, and I'll save questions for
I
another
didn't
time.
even need a 12-minute answer to do that.
No, well, you didn't, but you did use up 4 minutes of my time answering questions, so it was really only 8 minutes. But thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council President.
That it, you sure?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Now I'm going to open it to the public. The mic is right over there to my left. Any public comment or questions? Elizabeth Conway?
Elizabeth Conway, 20 Netherwood Circle. I just have a quick question as to the structure of your budget. This is a calendar year budget, so this is for the calendar year 2020. It's almost July 1st, and we're working on a budget that's still not completed. When do you anticipate, you can give me any time, will it be done by the end of July? And I don't understand, if you have a budget, shouldn't this have been done quite a while ago? I'm on the Board of Education, and I've just learned, like, our budget started July 1st, but it had to be submitted by May. So could you explain how it works through the town council that we're into almost July and we're working on a budget that 7 months is almost arriving?
Yeah, so that's one of the intricacies, I guess, for lack of a better word, of having a calendar year budget when your state has a fiscal year budget. We used to be fiscal, I think, back in 2005, 6, somewhere, 8? I thought it was 8. 8, yeah. They switched to calendar year. They thought there were some advantages to it. There may be advantages to it. One of the negatives is that you don't know your state aid in the town until, obviously, the state develops that aid. We just received some of those numbers and still haven't received other numbers. So when we expect to have this done, I can't say our budget's done. It'll be up to the council to when they do. But you're right, it clearly, even if this budget gets cut, you have 5 months, 6 months left to make those cuts. So you're expanding or exponentially the impact of those cuts.
So then wouldn't it be beneficial to go back to a fiscal to go along with the state? Or what are the positives that made you switch to a calendar year?
Yeah, I wasn't involved with that change. There has been discussion of going back. I don't know how far those discussions will go. I think there are positives and negatives to both. But I think I've been hearing people at least have that conversation. I've been asking the questions also. So that would be something that I think that we would be looking at. And obviously we would want to do what's best for the township itself. But good question.
Thank you. And I saw the list of expenses, and one of them is community relations. Could you explain what that is particularly? Because the others are all self-explanatory.
Do you remember how much it was?
It didn't have a dollar figure. Okay. It had a percentage, I believe. The total came to your 24%. It was one of the pages.
24%.
Was it a salaried position or an expense, do you know? Because I'm drawing a blank on.
Community relations. 24%.
It was in my presentation?
Yes.
It started up top with the police, the fire. Keep going. One more. Keep going.
I don't know what she's talking about.
Here you go. Go back.
Go back?
Yeah.
One
Nope.
more?
Where's that at?
Keep going. That one. Oh, community outreach. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, I was going to say we do.
I'm sorry. I had the first word right.
So you want to know what that is?
Yeah, could you?
Yeah, it's just projects that you reach out into the community, whether you give them services or help for something that they would require.
Could you give me an example?
Mentoring.
Community policing, maybe? I mean, our municipal alliances, community outreach.
Okay, so that's an example.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
For the kids, the juniors. Police Academy.
Good evening. I'm Raylene Duran, 71 Lexington Avenue, Edison.
Excuse me, your name again?
Raylene Duran. On page 9, I'd like to know what the other miscellaneous revenues on page 9, where is that from? When you say miscellaneous, what is that from?
I mean, that's just a grouping of, Councilman Patil had mentioned some of the other revenues that we have. You know, they could be grants, they could be certain aids, or some one-time things or whatnot. We can give you, if you wanted, we could send you a list of what our other revenues are.
I would like that, and I would also feel that my time was much more respected if when I get notification that there is a 2020 budget presentation discussing potential tax increases on the citizens of Edison, that we would have more definitive information rather than coming up empty-handed with no real facts. And this is the same thing that happened with the Suez debacle, where lots of assumptions were made, and that's not okay. And we fought that, and we're going to fight tax raises as well. We are suffering tremendously in this state and all over because of a situation that does not make a lot of sense. When certain things are permitted and other things are forbidden, it's becoming patently clear that this is not about a virus. And a lot of us are very angry and upset about it, and we're very suspicious about the motives. And it's very significant to me that you said, Mayor, that we believe that this budget, we're not interested in what you believe. It's a free country still at this point, last I checked. So we're all entitled to believe what we would like to believe. What we want to know is what are the facts. We want to know dollar amounts, and we would like the Finance Committee to have all that information ready to be respectful of our time. Also, if you look at page 9, anticipated a surplus of $7 million. Why is there an anticipated surplus of $7 million?
That's the amount of surplus that we're using in this budget. So we had $8 million in surplus that was carried over from previous years. We're utilizing $7 million of that $8 million to make this budget what it is.
I see, thank you. I see also that on page 11, appropriations do not include debt service and library. If you compare pages 9 and 10, you'll see that the library happens to be exactly the same amount for appropriations as well as revenue. Specifically, $6,327,927. It's very nice and tidy. So that's understandable why that would be removed.
Well,
but why was debt service removed? Because debt service doesn't seem to neatly correspond to any non-property tax revenue that I can see on page 9, unless I'm missing something.
So you understand the library, we funded at what the state requirement is. So we don't have that choice at that point in time. The funding of the $6 million is what the state has the minimum requirement to fund the library. That's why that was taken out.
Mm-hmm.
The debt service was taken out because at this point in time, the debt service, we don't have any options on. So therefore, since there's no options of what we would fund, we just took it out for ease of the reader to draw conclusions, I guess.
Okay, you guess. I'd like to also mention, it's interesting what you had said, that, Mayor, that you can't really say, you can't really know what's going to happen or come from the state. Neither can we. We don't know which capricious law will next be enacted with absolutely no control on the executive orders that the governor of this state can make. And we would like to know why it is that when we have had a lockdown, when it is known and it has been shown that this is similar to the flu, the death rate is very low, and as we have more people being tested, we will see there are more cases, which is the denominator. To get a death rate, okay, you have the numerator over the denominator, which is deaths in the numerator and cases in the denominator. So as we test more and we get more cases, even with Governor Murphy sending sick patients into nursing homes, according to one administrator, with 5 body bags per sick patient from the hospital, when we know scientifically as fact that those are the most vulnerable among us, causing many deaths. In fact, in 5 or 6 Democrat-run states, are accounting for almost 50% of all deaths. And we find it very interesting that this virus seems to prefer states in the Northeast, where most of the deaths are coming from. And I would like to suggest that the people who are representing us, with our consent of the governed, will take it up instead of taxing us more when many of us have lost our jobs and are struggling at home to do what we can to feed our children and take care of our families because we're not allowed to go outside and the parks are closed or have been closed. I would like to know, why don't you go to the governor of this state, because he's the one making these capricious laws. And it's significant to note that the flu shot has a 6.6% death rate, whereas this virus, which came to us in 2015 as detailed in the journal Nature Medicine, which was co-authored by the CDC, Harvard Medical School, and Wuhan Institute, among others, has a death rate of 0.24 to 2.26%.
Time, you can come back, but you've used all of your time, your 6 minutes. You can come back, though, and finish.
I'm sorry, I wasn't told that I had a time limit. Can you please explain to me where that's written?
It's 6 minutes.
It's every council meeting is 6 minutes.
It's in the council rules that were adopted years ago.
Okay,
Speakers limited to
so
6
it would be
minutes.
helpful that before the people speak, because not all of us know all the rules and have them memorized, it would be very helpful and most appreciated if you could please say that when the members of the public come up to speak, there is a time limit of 6 minutes, and we would also appreciate it if you would take it up with Governor Murphy, who is making the decisions to keep the state locked down. Thank you.
And thank you. Anyone else?
Council President, she gets additional 3 minutes when she comes back up.
Excuse me?
She gets an additional 3 minutes.
Yes,
like
I know.
Later, okay, just so
Yeah.
she knows she can come back.
Yeah. I'm just trying to check if
Just
anybody
to be
wants
clear,
to
though,
refer.
that it's supposed to be on rebuttal. 3 minutes, 3-minute addition is supposed to be on rebuttal. I know council has
Okay,
been
rebuttal,
very
okay.
liberal with
Okay.
what constitutes rebuttal, but
Yeah.
it's really intended to be if someone comes up and makes a point that you disagree with, you have to have the opportunity to rebut it, so.
Yeah. I just, in lieu of what you said, I can find residents not understanding this is a different type of forum, it's a budget presentation, may not believe it's the same as a council meeting, that's all. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak? I don't want to, cut anybody off. If not,
Motion to close the public portion.
Second?
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, so may it be. Can I get a motion for adjournment?
So move.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
It's done. Thank you. Thank everyone for coming out tonight. Thank you very much. I appreciated all the input that we received tonight.